Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNativeBloodyElbow.com coming to you live from the MMA Bunker. Trying not to smile because there's nothing to be happy about if you're a UFC fan. Total meltdown of UFC 177, which was a weak ass card to begin with. I can't believe they're trying to charge people $45 to $55 for this pay-per-view in the first place, and then tonight to lose the main event. Hanan Barrow, the former bantamweight champion, was going to be fighting TJ Dillashaw, the new champion, the man who dethroned him just months ago back in, I believe, March. Was going to fight for the rematch, a rematch that didn't make much sense since Dillashaw had beat him from pillar to post in the first fight. Wasn't even close. But for whatever reason, they thought Barrow was the most marketable opponent for him, and they booked that match, and Barrow missed weight. Had to be hospitalized today. He didn't even make it to the scales. He just complete failure to weigh in. UFC President Dana White said that he will not be getting a title shot upon his return, and might need to move up to featherweight because he's just not doing good with the weight cuts. This is the first time he's missed weight, but what an epic disaster. And there was no margin for error on this fight. And not only that, but just to add insult to injury, but Olympic gold medalist Henry Cejudo, who is about to debut, make his UFC debut at flyweight, also had to pull off the card for medical reasons involving a botched weight cut. Dana White says he's going to have to fight at bantamweight or just leave the UFC. I was surprised they signed Cejudo in the first place when he had missed multiple fights this year due to weigh-in problems. Just amazing. And this tells you right here, Dave Meltzer on his show on the Wrestling Observer Radio tonight was saying, this is a call to Jesus moment for the UFC, and it better be. I mean, they've already had to cancel one UFC this year because Jose Aldo got injured, the featherweight champ. They had UFC 174, which was a pay-per-view disaster that barely did 100,000 buys, might not have even done as many as Bellator's pay-per-view, which is amazing. Once upon a time, the UFC's floor was, 300,000 pay-per-view buys, and now, not that many years later, they're dropping below 100,000. And with this card tomorrow night, I mean, who is going to pay for this? Who is going to want to see TJ Dillashaw versus Joe Soto, who they've never heard of, on one day's notice with no depth on the card? I mean, Tony Ferguson and Danny Castillo as the co-main event. Are you fucking kidding me? That's not even a fight that could headline a Fox Sports 2 card or a Fox Sports 1 card. I would have a hard time seeing that fight headlining a Fight Pass card. I mean, good fighters. I'm looking forward to the fight, but it's just not pay-per-view caliber, and it just shows you, how thinly they've stretched things. And people have gotten onto me for harping on UFC oversaturation. Well, I was right, so eat it. I was totally right. I'm vindicated. This is a disastrous business strategy. They pushed it. They took all the resilience out of their business model. I mean, back in the day, they had so much depth on each card. That was part of their brand, that, boxing gives you these crappy one-fight cards. We give you a stacked card every time out. And now it just makes no sense why they're doing this pay-per-view in the first place when they had so little depth on the card. And then, that's one issue. The second issue is this weight cutting stuff. Fighters are pushing themselves to such risky limits to make these ridiculous weight cuts for really pretty marginal returns. And it's come back to bite them in the ass. They're going to have to step in and encourage fighters strongly to fight at weights that they can comfortably make. And then I got to tie in the John Jones UFC 178 cancellation. I mean, these fighters, not only are they taking extremely aggressive approaches to weight cutting and getting bad advice, getting extremely unprofessional nutritionist and medical advice on how to do these weight cuts, but then they're overtraining and killing themselves in training camp. I mean, how many fights are we going to lose due to injuries? John Jones versus Daniel Cormier was finally looking like we were going to have a hot fight. a car, and John Jones then trains with Alistair Overeem and injures himself. I mean, are you kidding me? Like, Overeem is a notoriously and infamously selfish, training partner who's notorious for hurting training partners, and he's bigger than John Jones. He's a heavyweight. John Jones, the light heavyweight, just ridiculously stupid, risk taking. These guys are not training smart. They need to step back, and the UFC's got to take a little bit of a hand in how these guys are training, because it's costing them fight after fight after fight. It's gotten to the point where, the one bit of good news they had today was that they sold out the Mexico City show with the heavyweight championship fight between Cain Velasquez and Fabricio Verdum that's coming up this winter. Sold it out in 8 hours. Awesome. The first episode of Ultimate Fighter aired in Mexico, hosted by Cain, coached by Cain Velasquez and Fabricio Verdum. Did amazing ratings. #1 rated show in the country in Mexico, which is great. That's a big market, huge boxing market. The time is right to crack that open. And here they are dicking around with this loser card in Sacramento, and spent last week in Macau dicking around with these failed efforts to break into the Asian market, which has been a huge loser for them. Refusing to admit that they can't make it in Europe, and they keep going back and trying, and it's just like, guys, focus on where the iron is hot. And the thing is, they get the good news that Cain Velasquez and the Mexico City debut is a sellout, and I'm thinking, great, I hope that the fight happens because both Velasquez and Verdum are human beings, and it's entirely possible one or the other of them gets injured. I mean, they've had 3 seasons of Ultimate Fighter Brazil, and only one of those has seen the coaches actually fight, and Verdum against Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira actually happened. But Vitor Belfort versus Wanderlei Silva didn't happen, and Wanderlei Silva versus Chael Sonnen infamously didn't happen at UFC 175 in July. So this combination of extremely aggressive weight cutting and way overtraining, so that you have injury after injury after injury. You've got the lightweight champ Anthony Pettis has been out all year. Cain Velasquez has been out all year. The heavyweight champ with injuries. John Jones having to postpone UFC 178. His big fight with Daniel Cormier. Alexander Gustafsson before that was supposed to fight John Jones in a big rematch. He had to pull out because of injuries. I mean, injury. Johnny Hendricks, welterweight champ, injured. I mean, they've got to do something to send a message to these guys, like, guys, take it a little easier. Like, find some consultants who can help these guys train in a less risky fashion, and help them get consultants that can help them manage these weight cuts, and not push them to do the weight cuts. But the biggest problem is there's just too many UFC events. I mean, like on September 5th, they're going up against Bellator on a Friday night with a way stacked card. I mean, you've got Alistair Overeem and all these other dudes on this card for no reason other than to fuck with Bellator. Like, why aren't those fights on this pay-per-view? Like, you're expecting your fan base to pay $55.95 for a fight card that's patently worse than one that's going to be free on Fox Sports 1 on September 5th. It's ridiculous. Like, it makes no sense. If you're going to have all these different offerings and all these different levels of fights, like, why shouldn't the pay-per-view be the very best product? I mean, why would you have a fight like Alistair Overeem versus Ben Rothwell? I mean, it's not like it's the greatest fight of all time, but it's much better than anything on this fight card tomorrow night that's supposed to be a $50 event. I mean, all of this just to show that they can crush Bellator. I mean, are they really that worried about Bellator? What the fuck? I mean, you've got Jacare Souza and Gegard Mousasi in a rematch, a title eliminator for middleweight title. You got Matt Mitrione fighting. You got Joe Lozon. I mean, Alistair Overeem. Those fights should be on this card. I mean, it just makes no fucking sense whatsoever that next week you've got a free card that's better patently enormously better than even the best version of UFC 177, even if they had Renan Barão, even if they'd had Henry Cejudo. I mean, it's just crazy time. And that's all I got to say on this, is they've spread the butter too thin, and it's not covering the bread. There's no coherence. There's no organization. They're not communicating to fans anything about expectations. I mean, the expectations are all over the place. You know, sometimes a great fight's on a Fight Pass card. Sometimes 3 great fights are on a Fox Sports 1 card. Sometimes no good fights are on a pay-per-view card. What the fuck? That makes no sense. If your product, if your pay-per-view product is supposed to be, I mean, you know, it's $55. That'll pay your cable bill for, you know, at least a month, you know, to get the Fox Sports 1 cards, like, plus all your other cable products. You know, you can watch Louis on FX and whatever the fuck you want to watch, but it makes no sense. So I'm just ranting at this point, but it's just, it's scarifying for somebody, you know, who's somehow stumbled into the position of finding himself in the industry, in the MMA industry, to have the UFC at the helm and just drive into iceberg after iceberg. And the worry is, are they even cognizant enough to know when they fucked up? I mean, I thought after UFC 175, when Ronda Rousey, you know, had just an amazing performance against Alexa Davis, but nobody remembers who she fought. And so then they made a concerted effort, and when they signed Holly Holm, you know, before that Holly Holm had been too expensive. Suddenly they get Holly Holm, the boxing champ. They're even open to bringing Chris Cyborg back. They're really pursuing Gina Carano. I mean, they realize that they can't just peddle Ronda Rousey against some chick, that they need opponents for her. And so they made some headway there. They canceled the I think it was UFC 176, you know, with Jose Aldo. But it's like, what if they hadn't canceled 176? How bad was this 177 card supposed to be? I mean, you know, this was a card that Danny Castillo and Tony Ferguson, Lorenz Larkin versus Derek Brunson, Besha Correa versus Shayna Baszler all moved over from 176 to 177, and the card still sucks. I mean, it's just crazy time. It's unbelievable. The hubris and the lack of focus, that's exactly what brings a great company down. And there's no doubt the UFC has had a great run, and they've still got a great product. They have an amazing roster of fighters, and there's still interest in their product. I mean, the interest in John Jones and Daniel Cormier is hot. The interest in Cain Velasquez versus Fabricio Verdum is hot, especially in Mexico, which is a huge thing to break into a major fight market like that. There's still enormous interest, or a fair amount of interest, in Anthony Pettis versus Gilbert Melendez coming up in the lightweight title fight later in the year. I mean, they've still got fights people want to see, but they're putting on so many fights nobody cares about and putting them on in so many different venues, it just makes no sense. They've got to focus. They've got to communicate to the fans that there are different tiers of the products. They've got to get organized and say, hey, you know, these are fights that are Fight Pass caliber cards. And these are FS1 caliber cards, and these are Fox caliber cards, and then these are the premium, the best of the pay-per-view cards. They've got to break those tiers out. They don't want to do it. They've been reluctant to do it, but they've got to start doing it. They've got to start giving clear tiers of programming, and they've got to work with the fighters to cut back on these cancellations, especially these last-minute weight cut fails. I mean, that is epic disaster. That is such a disaster for a fight promoter to have a fighter, you know, not just miss weight and blow a title fight, which we've seen before, but to pass out and be hospitalized and unable to fight, medically prevented from fighting. You know, I mean, that's just crazy. It's not worth the risk to the fighter's health. And it's definitely not worth the risk to the promoter's bottom line. So anyway, that's my rant. We'll be back tomorrow night with the 6th round after the fights tomorrow, which I know, I hope somebody's going to be watching the pay-per-view tomorrow. I'm going to have to be watching it. We'll see what kind of numbers it does. Dave Meltzer's predicting 70,000 for buy rate, which hard to argue with that. I cannot see it doing more than that. This is a fight card with no interest to the casual fan. So there you go. We'll be back with the 6 rounds tomorrow after the fights. Zane Simon and I. And Luke Thomas is threatening to join me for an MMA tete-a-tete on Sunday to talk about the aftermath of all this fallout. So we'll see how it all goes. Cross your fingers. Hopefully Luke can make it. He's gotten awfully big time since he left Bloody Elbow, and we are very proud of him for his success, but would like to share a little bit, so we're hoping to have him on the show on Sunday. So adios, MMA aficionados. Give us a like. Subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube. Follow me at KidNate on Twitter, and read us at BloodyElbow.com. Adios, MMA aficionados. This is Kid Nate.